All right. Dr. Moskowitz, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, can you, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Dr. Tano. I'm running these webinars, and today we have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Moskowitz. We have about 60 people on the call, and the number is going up every minute, so I'm just going to give people another minute or so to sign in before I let Dr. Moskowitz start. But again, I'm Dr. Tano, one of the primary care doctors here, and we are doing these webinars as a way to stay engaged with our patients during this COVID crisis. While the office is partially shut down to in-office visits, we are all still here doing virtual visits. I just want to take a moment to talk about the upcoming webinars for this week. Tomorrow, Wednesday, Lori Shell is one of our nutritionists. She is our nutritionist, not one of, and she is pairing with Dr. Park, who is one of our clinical psychologists, and they're going to talk about healthy eating and nutrition as a means for weight loss, especially with a focus on while everyone is at home and isolated. So that should be a good talk if you've ever struggled with weight or you're curious about how to control snacking while you are isolated. And then Friday's lecture is nurse practitioner Kathy Kemper-Deem is going to do a lecture on doing a home exercise program. I think she's going to target beginners as well as people who are struggling with their gyms being closed and trying to figure out how to get their work in out at home. But those are the two lectures for the week. And then stay tuned. We'll get an email about next week. We're still nailing down some speakers, so hopefully we can bring you something good. But just as a note, today the lecture will be recorded. We are going to be posting these. We're still working on it, but we think to YouTube because we're having some trouble with some technical issues of posting on our website. But eventually they'll be up. I just say that because if you submit a question and you include any kind of personal information and we read it out loud, I just want to let you know that it is recorded and it'll be posted later. So just be careful if you don't want to share anything. And that being said, a couple of housekeeping things. If you could mute your mics if you're not muted already in this day of everyone doing Zoom. I think we all know that by now, but just as a reminder to check your status. And then what you'll see on your screen is a chat area where you can submit questions, and those are public, I think, to the whole group, and people can see them. And then also there's the QA section. So the way today is going to work is Dr. Moskowitz is going to give a wonderful presentation, and then at the end, we'll take questions. So if you have something, go ahead, you can submit them throughout the talk. If it seems pertinent at the moment, I'll interrupt her with the question. Otherwise, we'll wait till the end, but feel free to submit questions. And again, just, I'll read them out, so just don't include anything that's too personal. And then I just want to introduce Dr. Moskowitz. She's one of our clinical psychologists here. We have two in the office. She is available for virtual visits and as well as our other psychologists. So she's going to give a talk today on anxiety, depression, stress during COVID-19. She is back by popular demand. She did 3 lectures a couple of weeks ago, and they were very well attended. And she makes these adorable little drawings that you'll see today. And I just want to do a little plug for her because I'm so impressed. She posted these drawings on Facebook a few weeks ago, and she had one that was went viral, shared 50,000 times. So this is good content. People are relating. I'm excited about it. She has a website, Whiteboard Psychology, where you can see all these drawings later if you want to look at it. But today she's going to be talking specifically about stress and anxiety and depression in COVID. So with no further ado, I will hand her the stage, but please submit questions so that we have a little bit of an interesting discussion at the end of the lecture. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Dr. Tano. And I'm glad to be back. We had one on anxiety that Dr. Tano and I were doing together in that series a few weeks back, and we had technical issues with the visual, so I'm glad that we can do it again here. So like Dr. Tano said, I've got this website and Facebook page, so any of these visual resources, if you want to access them later and see more, you should definitely check those out. They're there. That's everybody needs a quarantine project to kind of keep them occupied, and that's mine. So if you want to look at those materials, they're there for you, trying to just spread some tools far and wide. So for starters, this is today's roadmap. We're going to talk about first just defining these things, what we mean by anxiety, depression, and stress. We're going to differentiate between, there's a lot of coping tools we're going to get into, and we're going to kind of separate between the ones that are problem focused versus the ones that are emotion focused, and we'll talk about what that means. And then when we get into tools, there's some tools that we're really looking at for mental health maintenance, the kind of things that, oh, I see there's a typo and I can't even fix it. Mental health maintenance, there's a missing N. Sorry about that. So we're going to talk about some ongoing tools you can use, and then sometimes you just need something in the moment. You're having a really hard time, you're feeling incredibly acutely anxious. We'll talk about some things you can do right there in the moment to help calm yourself down. And again, we really welcome questions to make this as interactive as possible. I can't see, I've got full screen on, so any questions you send privately to me, I can't see while this slide shows up. So please direct your questions either in the public group or if you want to send them privately to Dr. Tano. All right, so starting with anxiety. What we mean by anxiety, it's our natural threat our natural response when we're feeling threatened. And it's worse when we can't predict and we can't control what's going on that feels threatening to us. And it's a hardwired response. This is part of our fight or flight response. And there's a lot of distinctive physical trademarks that show up with anxiety, and certain patterns of thinking and certain patterns of behavior. So from a physical standpoint, some of the things you might be feeling when you're feeling anxious, maybe your heart is racing, breathing hard, sweating, dizziness, headaches, stomach problems, feeling really fatigued, muscle tension, difficulty sleeping. Those are some of the really common ones that show up. And then when we're feeling anxious, we're often thinking in certain patterns. We're jumping to worst case scenarios and kind of going to that catastrophic thinking. We're often ruminating on things that are out of our control. And what if this happens? And what if that happens? And it's that feeling that your worries are really on a runaway train and you can't get a hold of them. And so when we're feeling anxious, we tend to do certain things in response. Sometimes we avoid. When that doesn't work, we're often looking to prepare to deal with whatever it is. We're looking for information. We're looking for reassurance. We're doing whatever we can to try to get control over the situation. And sometimes those are really helpful responses because, again, if anxiety is our response to a threat, then it's motivating us to do things to help deal with that threat. But sometimes those symptoms become themselves the problem. Depression. So these are the symptoms of depression here, and those first two are the key ones. So it's a drop in mood, feeling down, feeling depressed, sometimes just feeling flat, like no real emotion, not good or bad, just nothing. We're seeing a drop in our level of interest or drive, our motivation to do things at its worst. Even just getting out of bed in the morning can be really difficult. And getting yourself to take a shower, or if it's not that bad, you can still feel it in terms of just having a hard time getting yourself to do the things that you need to do, or even doing the things that you would ordinarily do, and not enjoying things the way you normally would. With depression, we see changes in sleep, either too much or too little. Same with appetite, too much, too little, or kind of dysregulated. Feeling more fatigued, having trouble concentrating, often having really negative thoughts about ourselves, feeling really guilty or a feeling of worthlessness. And there's physical changes too we see with depression. Sometimes we're so slowed down, we're walking slower, talking slower, moving slower. Everything is kind of like moving through sludge. Or sometimes it's kind of the opposite. It's sort of like a fidgety, restless agitation where you kind of can't sit still and can't get comfortable. And when things are on the worst side of depression, we're having thoughts of death. And that can be anywhere from kind of passive thoughts of, I don't want to be around anymore, or wouldn't it be great if I just didn't wake up tomorrow, in kind of a passive theoretical sense, all the way to more serious thoughts of self-harm and wanting to hurt yourself. And there's criteria for a major depressive disorder episode. And so the thing about mental health disorders to keep in mind is we have to have some kind of arbitrary cutoff to be able to do research, to bill for insurance, but these things really exist on a spectrum. So sometimes you're going to hit this cutoff for a major depressive episode, and sometimes you're going to have some of these symptoms that maybe don't meet full criteria, but they're still there, and we still want to take them seriously. So with major depression, you're feeling this most of the time, so at least 5 out of 9 of these symptoms, most of the day, most days, for at least 2 weeks. But if you're not feeling it on that level, we still want to keep an eye out on those symptoms, and it's much easier to try to nip it in the bud than to turn it around if it's getting really bad. And I think I'll just pause here to say, if you're having suicidal thoughts, please, please, please call the crisis hotline. I don't have it up right here, but we'll put it up on a slide at the end. That's an important number for anybody with depression to know. All right, so that's depression, and then stress. So stress is a word that we toss around a lot, and there's a lot of different definitions of it, but the one that I like to use is adapted from Lazarus and Folkman, who in 1984 kind of wrote about how it's really kind of a dynamic process. So if you can imagine this seesaw with the demands on us on one side and our capacity to handle it on the other side. So those demands, they can be demands on our time, on our money, our physical ability to do things, and capacity likewise. It's your emotional capacity, it's your physical, your financial capacity. And so just some examples of what we mean by that. And on the demand side right now, we're all facing some things universally, right? We're all facing this very big health and safety risk. We're all facing a lot of uncertainty and unpredictability. And that in and of itself is a huge weight on us. A lot of the patients I see individually are saying, well, I don't have it that bad. I'm safe at home and I can't understand why I'm feeling this way or why I can't get myself to get anything done. Well, even if you're not, an emergency room worker, or you don't have a financial catastrophe on your hands right now, just that baseline background level of stress from being in this pandemic, it's a huge demand on all of us. So on top of those things, some people are dealing with additional things like job loss, like having to take care of kids at home, maybe while working, just the act of going to the grocery store. Who knew a couple months ago that it would be such a difficult, stressful thing? And then on top of all those external demands, all those kind of concrete, practical things, often we've got the weight of our own demands and our own expectations on ourselves. Like, I should be fill in the blank. I should be getting more done. I should be on top of this or that. And that can weigh really heavily on us. So on the capacity side, the things that kind of boost our ability to meet these demands, obviously things like having more time, having more money, having better physical ability, it really helps, but also things like exercise, sleep, eating well, having good social support, being outside in nature, doing things like yoga or meditation. Those are all things that can really increase your bandwidth. And so when we're looking at managing stress, we're often looking at, okay, how do I reduce the demands, or how do I increase my capacity? Those are really kind of the two options you have. And a little bit about the stress response. So you might have heard about the fight or flight response, and that's a really hardwired, instinctive, automatic reaction that we have. And so if you think about caveman days, right, back in the day, the caveman is sensing you're under attack from a saber-toothed tiger or some kind of rival, and your immediate priority is to get away from that threat, either by running away or by defeating it, by fighting it off. And so in order to prepare your body to do those things, your body is going to need a higher volume of blood pumping through, more oxygen getting to all your big muscle groups. So your heart's going to start pounding, and your blood pressure is going to go up, and you're going to start sweating because that's going to help cool you down as you're overheating. You're going to have muscle flowing to those big groups, and so that's going to cause muscle tension if it's not being discharged. And so that response is very adaptive if a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you down. It's not a very adaptive response if you're dealing with an invisible threat like a pandemic. And so that's where a lot of those physical stress symptoms come from. We have that very same stress response, but it's just not really helping us the way it's intended to. And that's where kind of discharging that through exercise can be so helpful, because the stress response is literally preparing us to fight or run away. So going for a run or doing some shadow boxing or something that just kind of discharges that physical need. And the fight or flight response gets a lot of press. It's something we've all heard about. But the Tend and Befriend stress response it's newer in terms of how much has been written and spoken about it. So a lot of us aren't familiar with it. But the literature on this came about in the 90s. And it came from noticing that the people don't just respond to stress through running away or being aggressive, but often by turning to the people around us, by comforting the people who are close to us or seeking comfort, taking care of our family, of our friends, our loved ones. And so that's going to motivate a whole other set of responses to a stressful situation. Okay, so keeping those different stress responses in mind, we're going to talk about a bunch of coping tools today, and you can really break them down into two sets of responses. There's problem-focused coping, which are steps that you can take to deal with the actual problem in front of you. And then there's the emotion-focused coping, which is strategies to help you manage your own emotions and improve your emotional well-being, regardless of how bad the objective situation is. And in this current environment with COVID, there are some people who can do things to actually solve the problem, right? There's scientists working on vaccines. There's people who are producing and distributing protective equipment. There's healthcare workers on the front lines treating people. So those are people who are equipped to actually deal with the problem. For a lot of us, we're sitting at home and there's not much we can do about the actual problem, right? I mean, we can follow social distancing guidelines and we can make sure we have enough food, but we can't make this thing go away. And sometimes when a problem doesn't have a solution that we can actually act on, we can get stuck in feeling very helpless. And that's where our mind kind of starts spinning. We get stuck in worst case scenario thinking about problems we cannot actually solve. And so we want to be really mindful of when our brains are kind of stuck in solving unsolvable problems, because that's not going to be productive. And we always want to remind ourselves that no matter how bad the actual objective problem is, there's always something you can do for your own emotional well-being to kind of increase that capacity side of the equation so that you're better able to deal with the situation in front of you. So let's just take a pause here and breathe. And that is your very first tool. That is something that's always there with you. And we're often forgetting to breathe right when we're feeling overwhelmed and stressed. So if you want to join me, we're just going to take a few breaths together here to kind of settle ourselves in. So we're going to breathe in and out. And there are a whole bunch of different breathing tools and exercises out there. We'll walk through another one soon. But if you can't remember the details of the different kinds of breathing exercises, just focusing on your breath, even if you're not trying to change it or breathe a certain way, just focusing on the actual physical act of breathing, where you feel that air coming in and out of your body. That in and of itself is your first most important tool in managing stress and anxiety. All right, and then before we get on to try to do things about the feelings, one of my psychologist friends was saying just last week or so, she's like, you know what, everybody's putting all their coping tools out there, and yes, there's all these coping strategies that are really important, and we're going to talk about them. she's like, but I feel like people are missing the first step, which is before we try to do things to make ourselves feel better, we have to just acknowledge what we're feeling. And just the act of putting a name on an emotion can help take some of the sting out of it. It can help kind of contain it and make it more manageable. Because if it has a name, it's a thing that exists in its own place, and it's not it doesn't completely take over. And so this is a non-exhaustive list of some really common emotions. And if you don't really have much experience naming emotions or identifying them, you can just think about these 4 basic categories. And there's a lot more categories too, but we'll just start here. There is the kind of the family of angry feelings, the family of sad feelings, the family of anxious feelings, and the family of happy feelings. So sometimes you can't figure out what's the word exactly for what you're feeling, but if you can identify one of those groups, and then maybe kind of dial in a little bit more specifically from there. And if you want some more of a primer on understanding emotions and how they work, the movie Inside Out that came out a few years ago, Pixar movie, so great. I mean, great for kids, great for families, but really so much wisdom in there for all ages. And a patient recently who had the worst panic attack she'd ever had. It was going on for hours, and she said that sitting and watching the movie actually really helped her kind of make her way through that, and putting a name to identifying this is what's happening. She's like, anxiety is controlling my brain right now, and that helped her kind of write it out. Okay, so now that we've acknowledged what we're feeling, we can get to actually doing something to help ourselves. And this is a mental health maintenance checklist. And we won't get into all of these in detail, but it's a useful checklist to have and to refer back to. I think when we look at this, there's nothing here that's going to really surprise you. None of this is really that earth-shattering, but these are the kinds of things that sometimes we're in the middle of a crisis, or just in the middle of getting into kind of a depressed slump or going through a hard time. We just don't think to do these things. So we just want to be especially proactive about kind of noticing, checking in with ourselves, saying, okay, how much sleep am I getting? Am I keeping a regular sleep schedule? How much activity am I getting? So there's really the basics in the left column there. And then we get into the right column, and there's really different kinds of activities that are really good for your mental health. And part of the reason that abiding by this checklist is so hard right now is that if you were to join me for a thought experiment for a moment, and you think about, let's say you were trying to induce depression in somebody who you were holding captive, you had total power over them. So what would you do to make their life as awful as possible without physically doing anything, torturing them, right? You would put them in solitary confinement. You're going to cut them off from all human contact. You're going to keep them locked up inside without any fresh air or any sunlight. You're not going to give them anything enjoyable or productive to do. You're going to mess with their sleep. You're going to kind of take away their sense of time and keep them from having any sense of purpose or hope for the future. That's a really horrible thing to do to somebody. And you think about the situation that we're in right now with quarantine and social distancing, we're actually really set up for a lot of those things right now. This is why this is a very vulnerable time for mental health, because we're isolated. If we're stuck in our house all day and we don't have anywhere to go, we don't necessarily, unless we push ourselves, we're not necessarily going to get out and get some fresh air. If we're not, again, if we don't have our usual structure and routine in place and the things that keep us busy, then it's very easy for us to kind of fade away from any productive or enjoyable activity. We don't have to get up in the morning, then we don't have to go to bed at any time, and our sleep cycle can get all messed up. And when every day feels like the next and everything runs into each other, that's really hard for us. And we also don't know when the situation is going to end, and so that can get us really down. So on that depressing note, something to keep in mind is that if we know what's causing or what's worsening depression, then we can be deliberate about how to protect against it. So we're going to do all of those things in the reverse and try not to become a prisoner in our own home. So the biggest thing is to have some kind of daily structure for yourself. Because when you have that, you're going to feel more stable, life is going to feel more predictable and more under control. We don't want to go overboard. For anybody out there who has small children, the very first day when it seemed like most of us were, all of a sudden schools were closed, and we realized we were going to be stuck in a situation, there was this huge proliferation of these color-coded charts on Facebook, creating a new routine for your kids. And I did that too. And it lasted a day, not even, because we wanted so badly to create structure and control that we overplan and overprogram, and we set up unrealistic expectations. And when we do that, we just feel really terrible about ourselves. So we don't want to set anyone up for failure. We're just going to start with the real basics. So getting dressed in the morning, you don't have to, if it makes you feel good to really get dressed, that actually can be very helpful. But at the very least, just to have a separate set of pajamas to wear during the day versus at night. We want to have regular meal times during the day, so we're not just kind of grazing on the couch all day. And we want to plug in activity that's from that checklist a few steps back. So we want to plug it in things that are productive, things that are fun, things that are social, ideally things that are outdoors. So you're not going to get in all of those activities every day probably, but you want to try to do definitely at least one, and hopefully a few. And sometimes you can tackle a few of those at once. You go for a walk outside, that's physical, and that's outdoors, and maybe you can stop by somebody's front lawn and speak to them from more than 6 feet away, and you got social contact right there. Okay, and then we get to the end of the day, and we want to have some way to wind ourselves down to get ourselves ready for bed. So some kind of regular, relaxing bedtime routine. Hopefully that sets us up for a good night's sleep. So that's our mental health maintenance plan, and that's important to have on a regular basis. But sometimes you need something in the moment when you're feeling very anxious or very down, and you need something right now. So here's some tools that you can use for, I don't want to say a quick fix, but quick help. So definitely breathing, and I'll walk you through another breathing exercise soon. Going outside, I was seeing a patient today who was saying, she was like, normally when I feel this surge of anxiety, I know that I should go for a run, and that's going to be really helpful. Well, when I'm home with my kids, I can't leave them go for a run. But we talked about how she could at least just kind of go sit on her porch and get some fresh air and sunshine that way, and that her kids could be inside, and they're old enough to be unsupervised for 5 minutes while she's sitting on the porch. Doing some stretching, if you're familiar with yoga, going through some sun salutations or something, and that's helpful to kind of get you into your body and hopefully helps get you out of your head. Going for a walk, listening to music, jotting down your thinking and feeling, and if you have kind of like that emotion list from a few slides back, and you can kind of acknowledge, okay, this is what I'm feeling right now, and why am I feeling this way? And just that act of getting it out on paper helps it kind of live then, on paper and not be rattling around in your brain so much. Another thing you can do is just to pick a very simple task that you're doing, like folding laundry or washing dishes, and really just focus on that task and just the physical act of how the shirt feels in your hand, and trying to fold it a certain way, or the feel of the water as you're washing dishes. And that's, if you're familiar at all with mindfulness, it's really just about kind of being focused on the present moment, and that's an example of mindfulness in daily life. Calling a friend, always a good thing. Sometimes just having like a cool washcloth like on your face if you're feeling really flushed, or on the back of your neck. Sometimes jumping into a hot shower, taking a bath, be helpful. And these are grounding exercises. Grounding is a set of tools to, again, get you out of your head and back into the present moment where you are right now. So sometimes when we're feeling so flooded and overwhelmed, we need something very simple to bring us back here. So something I have people do is name 5 objects around them in the room. So where I'm sitting right now, I could say desk, computer, book, clock, water bottle. You might say, okay, can I find 5 objects that are blue, or 5 objects that are squares? Or you could kind of go through your 5 senses and say, okay, what's one thing I can see right now? What's one thing I can smell? What's one thing I can hear? What's one thing I can touch? What's one thing I can taste? And really focus on those physical sensations. All right, so now we're going to do a breathing exercise called box breathing. And that same patient from this morning was saying she finds box breathing really helpful because it, whereas some of these things like folding laundry or the shower, you can still be kind of stuck in your head. This really forces you to be very mentally present with the breathing exercise. And so it can kind of keep your mind from wandering off in all different directions. So it's called box breathing. Imagine a box, 4 sides. And so there's 4 parts to a breath. Right? There's a breath in, there's that pause between the inhale and the exhale. Then there's the exhale, and then there's that pause before we inhale again. And I've got 4 seconds up there. It's a very nice, easy number to remember. If the 4 seconds doesn't really work for you, you can, of course, adapt it and make things longer or shorter. Extending the exhale is generally a good idea because when we exhale longer, that helps our rest and digest response. It's kind of the counterpart to our fight or flight response. It's really what helps down. But we're going to start with 4 seconds right now. So if you want to practice with me, we're going to breathe in for 4. Hold it for 4. Exhale for 4. And hold for 4 again. So inhale. Hold. Exhale. Hold. More time. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. And hold. So that's a good one to hold on to. I'll give you another breathing exercise if you want, and this also has kind of like a visual and tactile piece to it. So you're looking at your hand, so you can kind of inhale, moving up your finger, and exhale, coming down. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. So now you've got some more breathing tools in your toolbox. And I'm going to walk you through one more exercise you can do in a moment. This is one that I recommend to folks a lot when you're dealing with worry that feels out of control. And so we'll walk through this exercise, and then after that, we are to the slides that I prepared, and we can have more of a conversation. So for this tool, this exercise is really
Vicki.
Oh, yeah.
Vicki, can I just interrupt with a question that is just about breathing exercises, just because I think it's pertinent in the very moment. A patient asked, sometimes people advise breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. Is that better? And if so, why?
I don't actually know if it's better or why. Yeah. So do what works for you. Or if somebody out there knows the answer and wants to put that in, I don't actually know. I mean, I think a lot of these tools it gives you something physical to focus on. And so, whether it's counting or, going up and down your fingers or like the box kind of shape, anything that can help kind of structure the breathing exercise, makes it just a little bit more concrete. I think a lot of people struggle with breathing when it exercises when they feel too abstract, but there might be a physiological reason too. Any other questions?
No, the other ones we'll save for the end.
Okay. All right. So this exercise, things I cannot control and things I can control. And so this kind of circles back to what we were talking about before with problem-focused versus emotion-focused coping. I found with a lot of the patients that I see, when people get really stuck in their anxiety, it's because they're focused really on that left column, the things they cannot control, and just kind of obsessing about all the bad things that could happen. There are really problems that they really don't have power over. And when we're fixated on problems we can't control, we lose sight of, one, is there a little piece of the problem that we can control, or two, we can always control how we deal with things to kind of help our emotional well-being, even if we can't change the real problem itself. So I'm going to walk through an example here. So you start out on the left side. I'm going to start out with all the things that you can't control. And so you can read this. I mean, these are just some of the common ones that come up, right? We're all interested about what if we get sick or someone we care about. There's the financial anxieties and what's going to happen with school and what's going to happen with testing and what other people are doing. And when we see other people not following the rules, that's very upsetting. Being away from our loved ones, there's so much right now that's out of our control. It's very easy to get lost on that side. So we want to kind of brain dump all those things on that side, and then we want to go to the right side. And for the right side, we want to think, is there some little aspect of each of those things on the left that can be offset, even just a little bit? And so, for example, we can't control whether people we love get sick, but we can control what we do to help protect them. We can't control, what supplies are available, but we can control whether we hoard them. Or I guess I wrote this before stores started implementing limits on things like toilet paper. So some of this is taken care of for us. But we can control what we purchase. When we get aggravated by what other people are doing, we can control how we respond to it. And sometimes, people are channeling that rage into, unproductive screens on social media. And if that makes you feel better, okay. But is that going to help? You just kind of check in with yourself. There's some of these impossible situations we're in, like every working parent out there who's trying to raise their kids and do their job at the same time. There's just some things that are out of our control. So at least we can control our expectations that we set for ourselves and not beat ourselves up for not being able to do the impossible. So, when we can separate those things, the things we can control, the things we can't control, then we have to get honest with ourselves about the limits of what we can do. And that's hard for us, right? We all like to be able to control our own destiny. But if we can separate those things, then we can stop wasting our energy spinning in circles that don't get us anywhere, and we can really focus instead on being constructive. And think about what are the things we can do to help ourselves, what are the things we can do to help our loved ones, and anybody else. And so just to end with a little illustration, because if we are busy being constructive, whether that's doing things that are productive or fun or social or doing some service to the world, then that worry is just going to have less space to take up in our minds. So that is it for what I've got here. And back to showing you all here. See this? Okay. All right. So let's see.
Here, I can help out. So there was a question. This is a good question. I live with major depression. How do I know if my feelings of sadness, frustration, and loneliness are appropriate to living in a pandemic, or if there's the start of a depressive cycle? We can't hear you.
Oh, can you hear me now? Oh.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. It's really hard. And I think, if you have pre-existing depression or anxiety, then these things are cumulative, right? So sometimes depression and anxiety just kind of come out of the blue. But when we have that pre-existing vulnerability and then a pandemic is layered on top of it, then everything gets amplified. So, a lot of these feelings are normal, but, anytime we're looking at what's the difference between clinical depression or clinical anxiety versus kind of those run-of-the-mill feelings, we want to think about, okay, well, how intense is it? How distressing is it? How much is it interfering with your ability to get through the day, to do your work if you're working, to in your relationships, or just to kind of take care of your daily business. But I think kind of going back to that idea with we were separating out kind of what's a major depressive episode versus what's sort of subclinical. I think it's important to recognize all of these things and to be taking steps for our mental health, whether or not, whether it's just general taking care of your mental health or trying to stave off a real depressive episode. But I definitely would recommend, if you don't already have a therapist, to reach out and get the help you need. If you are, I would say the majority of patients that I see who are on medication get their medication from their primary care doctor. So if you have a psychiatrist, then definitely be in touch with them. If you've never been on medication before, or if you have in the past or whatnot, definitely talk to your primary care doctor. And like Dr. Tana was saying, right now, so the office is not doing physical visits as much as possible, but everybody's doing virtual visits, and actually your doctors are a lot more available now than they normally are. I know a lot of people are normally very frustrated when it takes 2 months to get in, but now that your doctors are not physically seeing people in the office, they have a lot more openings, and so this is one of their, Dr. Tana can comment more about what your doctors can do to help you out, and just the importance of reaching out to your primary care doc.
I don't want to come in here into the spotlight or anything, but yes, as a primary care doctor, I prescribe antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications all the time, and we do have tons of openings in our schedule right now because we had to cancel a lot of our regular appointments, which leaves a lot of free time. And of the visits I am doing, virtual visits, maybe about a quarter of them, maybe a little bit less than that, are related to anxiety, depression, insomnia that has been exacerbated by this. So no, you probably don't need a psychiatrist if you are, having these thoughts or any kinds of depressive or anxious symptoms. But, if you have mild symptoms, I usually start with referring you to a therapist or focusing on some of the behavioral changes that Dr. Moskowitz had talked about before jumping into medications, especially if you've never had a history of it. I have a lot of patients now who are saying, I've never been anxious before, I've never had depression before, and for the last 2 weeks I can't sleep, and it's like, well, obviously that's related to what's going on as opposed to a true disorder that's underlying. But here we have another question. Hot topic in the practice. How do you feel about emotional support dogs as one way to help young adults cope with anxiety?
So emotional support animals are controversial in the sense that when people get documentation for them to go on airplanes, and that's a whole other can of worms we don't really need to get into right now. But as far as getting your emotional support through an animal right now, fabulous, wonderful. I think it's such an important, it's just so important for all of us to know what it is that helps us feel better. And so if you have an animal and you get your emotional support that way, that's wonderful. I see there's a question that popped up on the chat box now. So somebody shared a resource for guided meditation that they found helpful. And somebody else wrote, if you feel like you want to talk to a psychologist or psychiatrist, what are the steps? How do you find a good match for you? That's a really good question. So one thing, maybe just to tell you a little bit about kind of what I do and what Dr. Park does for the practice, because we are primary care psychologists, and we are here, our model is a little bit different from a kind of a traditional therapist. So we're kind of like the gateway triage to behavioral health. So if you want to talk to somebody, you're not sure how to get started or how to find a good match, and you just need somewhere to start, we're awesome. That's the role we serve. We're generally seeing people up to 8 sessions, usually every 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know about Dr. Park. I know I'm trying to see people more often if they need to be seen more often now. But you know, we do what we can, but there's a limit because we're trying to serve the whole practice. We have a good relationship with Quince Orchard Psychotherapy. They're also a Privia practice. They've got 20-something therapists, and they're in network with Medicare, Blue Cross, and Cigna. So something I've been doing a lot lately is that if I'll do an initial appointment with somebody who gets referred to me by one of the doctors here, or they just make an appointment themselves. I kind of get to know what their story is, and then I'll help them, especially if they have one of those insurances, and then I'll talk to Quince Orchard and say, hey, can you help me find a good match for somebody who's, you know, this age group dealing with this kind of issue? That has been helpful lately to get more of that personalized match. But in general, thinking about what you want to get out of talking to a psychologist or therapist. Some people just want the support. Some people really want tools, and they want somebody to give them strategies and not just kind of listen and be passive. So the more you can articulate for yourself what your goals are, the easier it's going to be for you to find the right match.
All right, this next question I'm actually going to answer, but feel free to jump in. When is it appropriate to treat with medication for insomnia? So I would say insomnia is a complicated problem to treat. Many people suffer from insomnia. I especially see it in postmenopausal women. That's a very common age group to present with insomnia. But basically, there's lots of techniques for treating insomnia that don't involve medication. We always try to start with those because the sleep medications sometimes can get you into a little bit of a can of worms. We do have a sleep doctor here, Dr. McConnon, who focuses on sleep disorders. But I can tell you as a primary care doctor, my first question is the true issue insomnia, or is there actually an underlying issue? Is somebody's anxiety keeping them up? Is their depression keeping them up? Is, you know, what is there something else going on? Do they have restless legs? Do they have sleep apnea? It's not always just somebody comes in and says, I have insomnia, and then we prescribe medication. There's obviously a lot of questions and answers that go into that kind of discussion. And then choosing, if you are going to go ahead with sleep medication, choosing the right medication for that person depends on a lot of other factors too. You know, are they not sleeping because their dog died last week versus are they not sleeping because they haven't slept in 20 years? I mean, these are different kinds of people with different problems that I would approach. So if you are struggling with insomnia, I would highly encourage you to schedule a visit with your doctor just to really go over your personal situation and try to figure out what the best thing to do for you is, because, you know, sometimes just treating with medications to force people to fall asleep is a little bit of a Band-Aid for an underlying problem. And then we do have, Dr. Moskowitz is here, but Dr. Park is our other psychologist here, and she especially likes to treat some insomnia problems. She works a lot around things called sleep hygiene, where people have a good routine before bed and good management of sort of coping mechanisms around insomnia. So I just want to give a little plug for her. But yeah, that's definitely a good question, but a longer chat for sure. It's not as simple as just prescribe.
Yeah, and maybe a webinar topic for us, behavioral strategies for insomnia. Could talk to Dr. Park about if she wants to do that.
Yeah, I'm trying to get her to do that. We'll see. So, and then here's another question that just came in, and we probably have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have something, please submit it. But a patient had recommended an online guided meditation that can put you to sleep. It does it for me. I feel like I missed. Oh, Jason Stevenson, I think is it's just a follow-up to an online resource recommendation.
Right.
And then, somebody said a webinar on sleep strategies would be wonderful. So I will do my best, but you know, everyone's busy, so it's not always easy to pull these webinars together. But yes, I agree, that would be a great topic. All right, any other questions coming in, guys? I think otherwise we might end early, but if somebody has anything they'd like to ask, I think now or never. Well, not now, never, but.
I could jump in with some
yeah.
some behavioral strategies for insomnia. Again, you know, we can give you more resources at length if you want to. If we do a webinar, or if you want to come with Dr. Park or myself, but just basically some of the important pieces are to keep a regular sleep schedule. So especially hard these days, if you don't have a reason you have to get up in the morning, you can stay up late watching Netflix and then sleep in. But you really want to try to keep as much of a consistent schedule as possible. You want to keep the equation bed equals sleep, and that's part of classical conditioning. It's that conditioned association that your body is used to bed being a place of sleep, and if you spend time in bed awake doing other things like scrolling through your phone or just kind of lying there tossing and turning and being agitated or watching TV, then your bed is not just associated with sleep. Now it's associated with being awake and alert and anxious and engaged in other things. So, so that's where we get to the recommendation that if you are in bed and not able to sleep, that you get out of bed, do something relaxing until you're feeling sleepy, then get back into bed. And also not to use your phone or other screens in bed. And some other basic tools, having a good wind down routine before bed. So so somebody shared Jason online guided meditation with Jason Stevenson. They said that helps them fall asleep. The Calm app and the Headspace app are both very popular, and they both have stuff for sleep. Doing something like listening to relaxing music, doing some gentle yoga, anything that's going to help you kind of wind down so your brain has a chance to kind of decompress before you're getting into bed for the night. Those are all things to try.
All right. Well, thanks, guys, for another successful webinar. Like I said, we have, thank you to Dr. Moskowitz for putting that together. That was great. We will be posting either the slides or the webinar link on our website. If you want to find her stuff on Facebook, you can search Whiteboard Psychology. I also have the link there in the chat, but that's probably an easy way. Or what was the website again?
It's whiteboardpsychology.com.
Just that. Okay, there you go. Whiteboard Psychology. There you go. You can find all of those cute little drawings. Just last minute, tomorrow, Wednesday, we have the talk with Lori Shell, our nutritionist, on weight loss through good eating. And then Friday is nurse practitioner Kathy Kemper-Deem is going to give a lecture on doing some home exercises, because I know we're all struggling a little bit with getting bored of just walking around the neighborhood. But if you guys have any questions, feel free to send your primary care doctors questions. We're all here. We're available. We're happy to help. And thank you for listening. And thank you, Dr. Moskowitz, again.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Good afternoon, guys. Take care. Bye.